The air shook with the roar of countless throats, a storm of voices rising and falling in a frenzy of bloodlust. The arena was carved into black stone, etched with alien symbols older than any human tongue. Beams of light swept across the stands, highlighting faces twisted in anticipation, reptilian jaws snapping, insectoid mandibles clacking, the gleam of cybernetic eyes adjusting focus. Their cheers were not just for sport, but for ritual. Violence was sacred here, and the humiliation of weaker species was the highest entertainment. A procession of mercenaries emerged from the gates below, armored bodies glinting under the harsh glow. Between them shuffled a prisoner. Shackles clinked with every hesitant step, echoing louder than the riot of the crowd. He was not the image of a warrior, frail shoulders hunched, hair the color of ash, beard unkempt, one leg dragging as though burdened by age itself. A cane struck the ground with dull thuds, but the guards still yanked his chains as though he were a beast resisting them. His face, half hidden by a ragged patch, revealed nothing but indifference. The sight drew raucous laughter. Some aliens slapped their claws against the stone railings, others hissed derision in their own tongues. A human, dragged into the arena of the mercenaries? And not even a soldier, but an old man who looked ready to collapse before reaching the center ring. Their jeers grew sharper, voices dripping with contempt. Asterisk. This is humanity? The scavenger species? Let him squeal before he dies. Asterisk. Above, towering holograms translated the insults for all to hear. Humanity's name was spat out like a joke. In the galaxy's wars, humans had once been dangerous, but now they were scattered, colonies fractured, fleets broken. To parade one in the pit was to remind every eye that mankind was finished. The guards shoved him forward, forcing him to stand beneath the floodlights. His body sagged as though the weight of the galaxy had long since ground him down. He didn't raise his head, didn't meet the crowd's gaze. He merely breathed, slow and steady. The audience mistook that stillness for fear. They wanted thrashing. They wanted begging. But this relic offered nothing. A towering reptilian leaned over the railing and barked something guttural, a challenge the translations called, asterisk. Watch carefully. He'll collapse before the fight even begins. Asterisk. The crowd howled its approval. The mercenary champion waiting at the far end sneered, already certain this would be over in one swing. Even the scattered humans among the seats, colonists, slaves, wanderers, turned their eyes away. Some clenched their fists, ashamed to watch another of their kind humiliated. Others whispered prayers that the death would be quick, if not dignified. None expected anything more. Humanity had grown accustomed to loss. The old man's silence unsettled a few. His face was lined with years of struggle, but his gaze, hidden behind that patch and the shadows of his brow, was too steady. His breathing was not ragged, not panicked. The cane tapped once against the ground, then stopped. In the chaos of jeers, one child tugged at his father's sleeve, whispering in a trembling voice, asterisk. Why doesn't he look afraid? Asterisk. The father gave no answer. The crowd demanded a spectacle, and the announcers delivered. Amplified across the Colosseum, a booming voice recited the litany of the mercenary champion's victories. Dozens slain, trophies claimed, blood spilled in endless duels. The spectacle was scripted, mighty alien warrior versus fragile human prey. The conclusion was meant to be inevitable. But the old man did not bow. He did not tremble. He lifted his chin just slightly, and for a flicker of a heartbeat, his expression shifted, not defiance, not pride, but something colder. Those close enough to see it stopped cheering. It was not the look of prey about to be devoured. It was the quiet expression of someone measuring, someone waiting. The announcer's voice faltered when he noticed the silence creeping outward from that moment. A ripple of unease moved through the stands, quickly swallowed by renewed shouting. They would not allow one fragile figure to sour their appetite. Yet the old man still hadn't spoken. He hadn't moved beyond the minimum forced upon him. He stood in the sand of the pit, eyes cast forward, as if he had already seen what would happen next and no longer found it worth comment. The mercenary champion bellowed across the distance, slamming his weapon against the ground to draw every gaze. The crowd cheered louder again, drowning out the silence, restoring the expected rhythm of the ritual. They thought the moment passed. They thought the human stillness was nothing but resignation. They were wrong. What the crowd saw was an old man dragged to die. What they did not yet understand was that death itself had just entered the arena. The champion advanced with deliberate steps, his massive frame glinting under the arena lights. The weapon in his hands was forged for intimidation as much as killing, an axe of plasma and alloy, edges humming with deadly energy. The crowd fell into a hushed anticipation, savoring the moment when ancient flesh would be cut down by alien strength. All eyes rested on the frail figure standing motionless in the sand, and every mind agreed, this fight would be mercifully brief. The first swing came like a storm. The axe tore through the air with a howl, aimed to cleave the human in two before the crowd could blink. But instead of falling, the old man moved. Not quickly, not with the frantic panic of prey, but with a measured step aside, the blade missing him by a hair. Dust scattered where the weapon struck, the ground cracking under the force. Gasps rolled through the stands, a single ripple of disbelief. The mercenary champion snarled, surprised at even that much resistance. Another swing, heavier, faster. Again, the man shifted just enough. His cane fell to the sand, discarded without hesitation. He straightened, his hunched posture unfolding until his full height stood revealed, lean but steady. His shoulders squared, the years seemed to fall away from him in that single motion. For the first time, he met the champion's eyes, and for a brief instant, the alien faltered. The hand that reached for the patch was steady, almost ritualistic. Cloth peeled away from his face, exposing what had been hidden for decades. Not the hollow socket of an old wound, not the ruin of a lost battle, but a gleam of steel and light. A cybernetic implant, archaic in design but unmistakably lethal. A targeting array, the kind used only by elite strike pilots of wars long past, now integrated into his skull. The crowd froze. Those who had studied history recognized it immediately. Others felt the sudden shift in atmosphere, the weight of revelation pressing down like gravity. Whispers slithered across the stands. Some scoffed, unwilling to believe. Others murmured names pulled from memory, fragments of stories once dismissed as myth. *Reaper. Death's Hand. The Ghost of Soul. Legends told of a pilot who never missed, a soldier who dismantled mercenary fleets piece by piece until even hardened warlords whispered his name with dread. He had vanished decades ago, presumed dead when the human front collapsed. But now, standing in the dust of the arena, the phantom had returned. The champion hesitated, grip tightening on his weapon. He had expected a feeble execution. Instead, he faced a name etched into mercenary nightmares. The crowd felt it too, laughter turning to silence, derision shifting to unease. This was no anonymous prisoner. This was a ghost who had once carved his mark into the stars. The old man lifted the blade he had been given, examining it with the casual eye of someone who had wielded far finer tools yet could kill with anything at hand. His stance shifted, subtle but unmistakable, not the clumsy grip of a captive forced into combat, but the efficient poise of a trained killer. He moved like someone who had rehearsed the dance of violence countless times and never forgotten a step. The silence broke when he finally spoke, his voice gravelly but clear, carrying through the amplification systems without effort. "One more fight. That's all." Simple words, but heavy with finality. Not boastful, not pleading, just a statement of fact. A shiver went through the crowd. This was not the sound of a man preparing to beg for life, but of someone who had already made peace with death long ago. His presence altered the very texture of the air. The spectacle of humiliation had twisted into the promise of reckoning. Veterans among the aliens remembered. They had fought in the shadow of the old wars, when human fleets burned brighter than anyone expected, when death came not as a wave but as a precision strike that dismantled armies piece by piece. They recalled orders barked by terrified commanders, *, "If you see him, do not engage. Retreat." That warning had a name, and now that name walked again. The champion roared, attempting to drown out the fear. He swung once more, desperate to end the moment before it grew into legend. But the old man did not flinch. His cybernetic eye glowed faintly, systems aligning, measuring distance, calculating trajectories with machine precision layered atop human instinct. The blade in his hands rose smoothly, not with the force of youth, but with the practiced inevitability of mastery. The crowd's hunger for spectacle had shifted to something else entirely. They were no longer watching a sacrifice. They were witnessing history reawaken. The laughter was gone, replaced by a silence so profound that every breath of the combatants seemed to echo. The old man's identity was no longer in question. He was not prisoner, not relic, not forgotten. He was the Reaper, and he had come to remind the galaxy that even in its twilight, humanity did not kneel. The champion lunged with renewed fury, weapon-cleaving arcs of searing light through the air. Each strike was a display of brute dominance, the kind that had ended countless opponents before this moment. Yet every swing met only emptiness, the old man already gone, feet sliding with minimal effort, each evasion precise as though he had calculated the attack before it began. The sand bore the scars of missed strikes, craters carved by rage and strength wasted. Where the alien fought with overwhelming power, the Reaper answered with economy. He never wasted motion. A tilt of the head, a pivot of the hip, a twist of the wrist, small adjustments that turned lethal blows into harmless air. The audience realized what they were seeing, not speed born of youth, but a predator's instinct honed over decades, experience so deep it bordered on inevitability. The first counter came as a whisper of steel. A quick slice at the joint of the champion's armor, so swift it looked accidental until blood welled through the crack. The alien snarled, red fury spraying across the sand, but the wound was small. Yet the crowd shifted uneasily. This was not an old man trying to survive. This was a surgeon beginning his work. Again and again the champion swung, his weapon glowing hotter as his desperation grew. Each attack was met with the same calm rhythm: step aside, deflect with the flat of the blade, cut where the armor gapped. Tiny wounds multiplied. Not fatal, not yet, but deliberate. Every strike was a message: you are being dismantled piece by piece. The cybernetic eye gleamed, tracking every detail. The way the alien's chest heaved, the shift of his balance, the slowing of his left arm as blood loss set in. The Reaper adjusted seamlessly, exploiting weakness as though he had been waiting for it all along. His silence was more unnerving than words. Where others might taunt or roar, he offered nothing. The only sound was his steady breathing and the hiss of steel cutting flesh. Spectators who once screamed for blood now found themselves leaning forward, silent, compelled by the unfolding precision. Even rival mercenaries, hardened killers themselves, felt the cold recognition of mastery beyond their measure. This was not luck, not spectacle. This was discipline born in wars that had nearly broken the galaxy. The alien bellowed, trying to rally his pride, and swung in a massive overhead arc that cracked the ground. Dust billowed high, obscuring vision for a heartbeat. When it cleared, the Reaper stood unscathed, his blade pressed lightly against the champion's throat. A bead of blood trickled down before he withdrew, letting the moment settle. The roar of the crowd died into a hush so absolute that even the distant hum of the arena generators could be heard. Then came the shift in momentum. The Reaper no longer evaded entirely. He allowed blows to graze close, redirecting them with subtle parries that robbed them of strength. Each deflection fed into his next movement, his blade always finding a new seam, a new weakness. The alien's breathing grew ragged, movements slower, frustration mounting into panic. He had entered the arena to kill a relic, but now found himself reduced to prey under the gaze of a predator who had already mapped out his death. The end approached with grim inevitability. The champion raised his axe for a final desperate strike, pouring everything into one conclusive blow. Time seemed to stretch, the crowd holding its breath. The Reaper shifted his stance, weight balanced perfectly, and in one motion sidestepped the descending weapon, turning with practiced fluidity. His blade traced a single precise line across exposed flesh. The axe crashed into the sand powerless. The alien staggered, eyes wide, weapon slipping from his grasp. Blood poured from the mortal cut, legs buckling under his weight. The silence in the arena deepened, an oppressive weight pressing down on every chest. Then, with a dull thud, the mercenary collapsed, lifeless. The Reaper stood over him, chest rising and falling with controlled breaths, his blade steady in his hand. He did not raise it in triumph, did not shout victory. He simply looked down at the fallen body, expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his words were quiet, yet carried across the silence like thunder. "Death walks with me still." The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in confusion, awe, and fear. Humanity's relic had become legend once more before their very eyes. What they had expected to be a farce had turned into a demonstration. One human, frail in appearance, had dismantled a champion in full view of the galaxy. And in that moment, the arena itself seemed smaller, as though it could not contain the weight of what had just returned to life. The silence that followed was heavier than the roar that preceded it. Thousands of voices struggled to find themselves, caught between disbelief and dread. The body of the mercenary champion still bled into the sand, the shimmer of his weapon fading into lifeless sparks. No one moved to claim the corpse. No herald rushed to proclaim victory. The spectacle had twisted into something none of them had prepared for, and the weight of that realization pressed on every throat. The Reaper wiped his blade clean with steady hands, as though the act meant nothing. No flourish, no display, just the efficient calm of a man who had done this too many times. His lack of triumph unsettled more than the kill itself. Victory was supposed to feed pride, to ignite celebration. Instead, it revealed only inevitability. He stood not as a survivor, but as the executioner who had chosen to delay the end until he was ready. Those who had lived long enough to remember the human wars whispered furiously among themselves. They spoke of fleets that vanished in the dark, of commanders whose names were lost because none lived to tell the stories. They remembered the warnings carried in hushed tones. When the Reaper appeared, battles ended not in hours, but in moments. He was never a symbol of overwhelming armies, but of the single, unrelenting precision that turned victory into massacre. Now he stood alive, flesh and machine fused, the embodiment of every fear the mercenary guilds had buried beneath years of arrogance. The younger aliens looked at one another confused. Legends had become real in the span of heartbeats. The veterans offered no comfort. Their silence was the loudest admission that the stories were not exaggerations, and that one man could indeed scar entire fleets. Some of the humans scattered in the stands began to stir. At first hesitant, their voices cracked as though uncertain they deserved to speak. Then stronger, pride long buried found purchase again. For the first time in generations, they shouted not in desperation but in defiance. Their voices carried differently than the crowd's shock, raw and rough, yet carrying a resonance that spread like fire. Alien leaders watching from their secure galleries stiffened. This was not the outcome they had paid to broadcast. The arena was meant to humiliate mankind, to remind the galaxy that humanity was irrelevant, their fire extinguished. Instead, it had done the opposite. Hope was dangerous, and hope carried on the back of legend could spread faster than rebellion. Mercenaries who had mocked only moments earlier now eyed the Reaper with something else entirely. Some saw opportunity, imagining what it might mean to serve under such a name. Others recoiled, fearing that even proximity to him marked them for death. None dared jeer again. The atmosphere that had once been thick with derision now carried the sharp edge of respect mixed with terror. The Reaper himself did not acknowledge any of it. He stood in the sand, weariness creeping into his shoulders, as though the burden of survival weighed heavier than the chains that had dragged him there. His cybernetic eye dimmed slightly, its glow retreating until it looked almost ordinary. He did not search for the cheers of his own kind or the fear in others. He looked instead at nothing, his gaze drifting past the arena's walls toward the stars beyond. Quiet words slipped from his mouth, not meant for the crowd, not meant for history, but only for the ghosts that trailed him. So many gone. Still not finished. The amplification systems carried the murmur across the Colosseum regardless, and those who heard it felt a chill. This was not the voice of a man basking in glory. This was the confession of someone who had outlived everything he cared for, still forced to fight because the galaxy had not yet learned to stop demanding blood. The body of the champion was finally dragged away, and even that act lacked the confidence it should have held. The attendants moved carefully, as though afraid that any sudden motion might draw the Reaper's attention. No victory was proclaimed. No bets were settled. The ritual itself had broken under the weight of what had been revealed. Above, messages flickered through the networked minds of mercenary leaders. Orders conflicted. Some demanded his immediate execution before the legend could spread. Others hesitated, wary of what it meant to strike down such a figure in cold blood. The debate itself revealed the fracture. Fear was already reshaping loyalties. The humans watching no longer bowed their heads. Some wept openly, their pride rekindled by the proof that they were not broken. Even one survivor, even one relic, was enough to remind them that their species had once shaken empires. That reminder, they knew, would spread faster than the arena's images ever could. The Reaper finally lowered his blade, not in surrender but in conclusion. His part was done. He had not asked to be remembered, yet memory clung to him like shadow. The galaxy had been shown what it tried to forget. And as the crowd trembled between awe and fear, he turned his face once more to the distance, to battles still waiting, to debts still unpaid. Chains rattled again, heavier now, as guards surrounded him with renewed caution. The order was unclear. Was he to be executed where he stood, or paraded as some twisted trophy? The factions within the galleries argued, their voices filtered through calm's networks, overlapping and chaotic. Some demanded his death to erase the symbol before it ignited rebellion, others insisted that to kill him here would mark the mercenaries as cowards. What had begun as sport now threatened to unravel into political fracture, and all of it centered on the quiet figure still standing in the sand. The Reaper showed no concern. He did not resist when the chains were thrown back onto his wrists. He knew how such games played out. For him, the outcome was irrelevant. What mattered was what had already been planted, the seed of remembrance in human hearts, and the return of fear in alien minds. Whether he lived another hour or not, the legend was alive again, and legends traveled faster than warships. Across the galaxy, signals carried the footage. Colonies that had long lived under oppression saw the moment unfold. Shackled miners in distant belts watched in silence before breaking into cheers, fists raised in defiance. In scattered slums on forgotten stations, the name Reaper was spoken with reverence, no longer as myth but as proof. For generations, humanity had bent its neck. Now they remembered how to lift their heads. The mercenary guilds understood the danger. Rebellions thrived on stories, and the most dangerous were those embodied in flesh and blood. One man standing against the champion and prevailing would ripple through every oppressed enclave. Each whisper of he lives carried the potential of uprisings, raids, sabotage. Fear once wielded against humans now threatened to turn upon their captors. Dragged through the tunnels beneath the arena, he finally spoke to those who flanked him. "You're too late. The galaxy's already seen it." His voice carried no triumph, only inevitability. The guards avoided his gaze, some with hatred, others with the unease of soldiers asked to chain a living weapon. When questioned by a guild representative, why he fought, why he had endured, his reply was simple. "I don't fight for myself. I fight because I buried men who deserve better. I fight because humanity remembers its dead." The statement was recorded unwillingly, yet those words spread alongside the image of his victory. They carried weight beyond any speech, for they were not the boasts of youth but the weary truth of a survivor who refused to let ghosts fade. In the cities of alien worlds, some sneered at the news, dismissing it as anomaly. Yet in the barracks of mercenary troops, younger soldiers asked questions their commanders could not answer. If one old human could dismantle a champion, what could a people united do? That doubt gnawed at discipline, weakening the certainty that kept mercenaries loyal to guild contracts. For the humans, it was more than pride. It was the return of a compass. They had wandered, leaderless, for too long, their history diluted into resignation. The Reaper had not come back to lead, yet his very existence redrew the lines of possibility. Even if he fell tomorrow, he had shown them that they were not finished. And that truth mattered more than survival. The moment of his removal from the arena was marked not by jeers but by a strange chorus. Some chanted his call sign, low and rhythmic. Others shouted it in rage, trying to drown it out. The name became a clash of tones, praise and fear intertwined, inseparable. He walked through it without expression, the sound of the galaxy wrestling with itself trailing behind him. At the final gate he paused, turning once more toward the stands above, though he could not see the stars beyond them. The lights framed his silhouette, chains heavy around his arms, yet nothing about him seemed diminished. His voice carried one last time, calm and unshaken. "Drag me where you will. You've already lost. Humanity does not kneel." The gate swallowed him, but the words remained. They repeated themselves in memory, in recordings, in whispers passed across ships and stations. What had been intended as a spectacle of humiliation ended as an echo of defiance too vast to silence. And so the galaxy was left with its new reality. An old man had walked into the sand to die, and instead reminded them all that humanity's twilight had teeth. They had not paraded a relic. They had reawakened the Reaper, and his shadow stretched farther than any chain could bind.